right, thank you, Dana Lyons. Beautiful. Thank you. So there's 5 words that are really, really important. Keep it in the ground. Repeat with me. Keep it in the ground. Keep it in the ground. Keep it in the ground. What should we do with all those oil sands and tar sands from Alberta?
Keep it in the ground.
What should we do with all that fracked oil from North Dakota and Saskatchewan?
Keep it in the ground.
What should we do with all that coal in the Powder River Basin in Appalachia and Canada?
Keep it in the ground.
What should we do with all that oil under the Arctic?
Keep it in the ground.
That's right, we got to keep it all in the ground, and we got to start using our energy from all of the above, the sun and the wind. And most importantly, we have to reduce our overall consumption of energy and resources to find a real solution. A real solution is not going to be just changing all our energy sources from fossil fuels to solar panels. More has to happen, and it's so great to see you all come here together with that spirit. And now I want to introduce a young rising star. I first heard her speak to the Regents Board of the University of Washington, asking them to divest their funds from fossil fuels. And ever since, I've been a great admirer of her. Her name is Sarra Tekola. She's a 21-year-old senior at the University of Washington, studying environmental science. She's done research on climate change in the Salish Sea, at the Elwha River in Indiana. And I introduce you Sarra Tekola.
I would not be here today in front of you if it wasn't for climate change. I was born out of climate change. My father came here as a refugee from Ethiopia, and the reason he had to leave was largely because of climate change. My grandfather worked directly under Haile Selassie, the last emperor of the 3,000-year-old Ethiopian monarchy. He left Ethiopia. My father left Ethiopia the day before Selassie was killed in the 1975 military coup. He was murdered because his people were unhappy with his actions as king, and more specifically, how he failed to deal with the famine of 1973 through 75. Selassie's failure to address this environmental disaster led to an estimated 200,000 lives being lost, which was one of the main causes for the uprising. The famine of 73 through 75 was a result of desertification, which caused the extension of the Sahara Desert into the agricultural lands and rendered them obsolete. Desertification has been increased by climate change. The drought and famine was not contained to Ethiopia, but also extended into all of the Horn of Africa and has now been ongoing for the last 20 years. Natural disasters such as these are not isolated events, because with natural disasters also come civil unrest. These areas that have been affected by droughts for the last 20 years correlate with the areas that have had civil war during the same time, including the neighboring countries of Somalia, Darfur, and Eritrea. Climate change has no borders. The natural disasters, which were intensified by climate change and resulted in war, led to massive migration. My father was one of those refugees. My dad finally settled in Seattle, Washington, where he met my mom, and years later I arrived. I was born to fight climate change, to right the wrong that forced my father out of his country and away from his family and home, just the way it has and continues to do with countless others. Radical Islam was frequently blamed as a catalyst for the Arab Spring, but it was the rising food prices that brought people out in the street. The Middle East is the largest importer of wheat. And when a once-in-a-century drought in China reduced the wheat supply, it caused food prices to rise 40% in the Middle East, making food unaffordable to many, thus setting the stage for the Arab Spring. Likewise, a 5-year drought in Syria that the Assad regime ignored caused 1.5 million farmers to leave their farms, move to the city, and cause ethnic and religious strife that in the end led to another civil war. Another example is the 200,000 farmers that were displaced from Niger and Chad due to the severe drought and famine. Many of them joined Boko Haram. The Boko Haram then took advantage of the poor response from the Nigerian government to the climatic changes in Nigeria, leading to the poverty and instability that made it easy for the Boko Haram to kidnap over 200 girls and massacre more than 300 civilians. Climate change is the biggest terrorist that the world has ever experienced. And this is one terrorist America won't be able to bomb its way out of. Perhaps that's why the West has failed to address it. No amount of gunpowder or drones will solve this problem. But just because our governments have failed to address this global security threat does not mean that we can allow for this level of irresponsibility. The conflicts that climate change causes are not retained to poor countries. Climate change does not respect political or national boundaries. Weather is local, climate is global, and climate change is indiscriminate of race, nationality, or culture. Climate change does not care if you're rich or poor, black or white, Canadian or native. When disaster strikes and resources are limited, everyone is just as likely to be drawn into conflict to resolve the disparity, however unequal that resolution may turn out to be. And even though climate change threatens us equally, the results are felt unequally. People of color, women, low income, and indigenous communities are in the front lines of the disastrous effects of climate change. Those who are least responsible are most affected. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As a young black woman and a second-generation immigrant, fighting climate change isn't a choice. It's an obligation and a duty to protect not only my rights, but my community and generations after me. I'm a 21-year-old senior at the University of Washington who plans to continue on to get my PhD in oceanography to study the acidifying ocean caused by our excessive carbon pollution. This is especially important to me because I live next to the Salish Sea, which due to coastal upwelling has some of the most acidic pH levels in all of the oceans. Staring into a microscope at pteropods at Noah's laboratory, I had a life-changing experience. I saw with my own eyes the proof climate change is happening now. The acidification in the ocean was causing the shells of pteropods to dissolve away their shell that they were composed of. No big deal, right? They're just some species I've never heard of. At least that's what some people claim. Pteropods are microscopic snails, so that most people have never seen them. So why should we be concerned about this little species being affected by climate change? Well, these microscopic snails are at the bottom of the food chain, and thus many creatures in the sea, including salmon, depend upon this food being present to survive. They are some of the most essential prey items in the ocean. When you pull out the bottom of a foundation, the whole house comes crumbling down. And when I recognized that the foundation of the ocean's food chain was being destroyed, I realized the state of emergency that we are already in. Further proof that climate change respects no borders and is not restrained to just poor countries. What do I have to look forward to once I graduate, given the current projection of our emissions? The end of coral reef? The extinction of wild fish in the sea, an increase of 2 degrees of warming, the rest of the Arctic's ice melting away. These are all forecasted predictions that could happen in my lifetime. The world's politicians are gambling our future away, and I don't plan on letting it happen. I fight to end climate change because I have no future if it is not stopped. When I'm old, I want to be able to tell my grandchildren that I fought for both theirs and my future. I want to be able to tell them I was part of a movement that changed history and averted the extinction of mankind. That I did just not sit back and let the world burn, but I did everything in my power to stop it. And so even though when it feels like we are but a splash of water on a burning building, if we come together as a collective, we can drown out the flames. So what does this look like? And how do we put out the flames? Well, I'm proud to tell you that you have already begun. By coming out here in the hundreds in solidarity with people across North America and in New York, where the largest climate change rally in history is occurring, we are already a part of the solution. We need to make climate change a populist movement. We need to make it a voters' issue. We need to raise enough concern over it that every politician and party make sure to have a climate change platform. We need to make it known to politicians that it is unacceptable to deny the existence of one of our biggest threats in human history. And if they decide that they want to deny climate change, then we will decide they are unfit for political office. Become involved with local politics. Call, write, and know your representatives. Let's not forget that it is our taxes that pay the politicians, and they're here to serve our interests. We put them in there and we can take them out. You see, we are at a turning point. The United Nations Summit in Paris in 2015 is our last chance to take climate action if we want to stay below 2 degrees. Let's shape history. Let's avert the extinction of mankind. Are we going to let them get away with ruining the planet? No! Are we going to let them get away with destroying the ocean? No! With ruining our future? No! So what are we going to do? What are you going to do?
Keep it in the ground!
That's what I'm talking about. Thank you, Sarah. Alexandra was talking about everything that makes us angry. Listening to Sarah, that gives me hope. Like she says, we can't talk about climate change without talking about climate justice too.